One of the worst murders in high security prison against one of the worst bacons ever. Now there's a few people asking us to do an updated video, and there's people mentioning this video saying, can you do one? Not realising that I did actually cover this video, but it was about 2 years ago when I had probably round about half the amount of subscribers that I do have now. So, the murder of Richard Huckle inside of HMP Full Sutton in October the 13th, 2019 by Paul Fitzgerald. Now, when I say one of the worst murders, it's because the violent nature of the attack, and it does say in one of the articles when he took this to trial, because Paul Fitzgerald actually took this to trial, even though he did say at the trial it was poetic justice. He wanted him to feel what his victims felt. And I think he must have been trying to get off with diminished responsibility, because Paul Fitzgerald was at the time a diagnosed psychopath. And he was doing an IPP sentence, and he was actually a bacon himself. He was in for some naughty crimes against women, but in his head, the hierarchy, he must have thought because he hadn't harmed little ones, and Richard Huckle, harmed little ones, hundreds of them, and Fitzgerald must have thought he was higher up in the bacon world, inside of the prison on the bacon wings, and he wanted to act out some poetic justice in his own words, and he brutally murdered Richard Huckle and inserted things and, in his own words, give him a taste of his own medicine. He was doing things to him as he was killing him. But I will get a little bit more into the details, but not too detailed, because as we all know, you've got to be careful what you say on this channel. Well, not just the channel, sorry, on YouTube, because otherwise it gets censored, and we do not want that. But there is a few stories people have been sending us lately which are absolutely horrific, and although we need to get this out there about these absolute disgusting, horrible wrong'uns, you've got to be careful on YouTube. So I am going to start doing some live streaming on Kick where you're not censored on there. It'll not interfere with anything on YouTube. I'll continue the videos on here, but some of the more graphic, especially the ones where I want to speak my mind about these wrong'uns, it'll be going on Kick stream, but I will keep you notified if you do want to go over onto that. So Richard Huckle was murdered in 2019 at HMP Full Sutton. He was 33-year-old at the time, and he was serving 22 life sentences for the abuse of up to 200 kids in Malaysia, Cambodia and India, and he was one of the worst of the worst. They did put him down saying he was the worst bacon in UK at the time. I was going to say UK history, but at the time. And like I say, I'm going to talk a little bit about who he actually was. Past tense, that bacon got fried, sizzled, absolutely scranned to pieces by another bacon. Two hogs taking care of each other. But I will tell you who Richard Huckle is, then who Paul Fitzgerald is, then I will tell you a little bit more detail about the actual attack inside of the pad. So, one of the articles that I've gotten up, just so I don't get any of the information wrong, because I have come on before, research it, and as I'm doing the video, you forget certain parts of it. So the gap year pedo Richard Huckle It says he's likely or highly likely to have had victims in the UK, but none had either come forward and none before his actual death had came forward. So Richard Huckle was from Kent, and he was convicted of 71 offences against 23 kids in 2016, but it was up to 200, nearer 200 victims that he'd had, obviously because of the different countries that he was going out to do his sick, depraved acts. Then they couldn't get the exact numbers. So to the outside world, Huckle was a regular 19-year-old from Kent. Fresh out of school, he was setting off across the world on his gap year like thousands of other British students. But no one could have predicted that the ordinary middle-class boy would become an extraordinary, evil pedo, one of the worst in recent history. His gap year was a springboard for a relentless campaign of Kid SA that lasted almost a decade. Like I say, you can't say exactly what it says in some of the online articles, and that's why I've got to be careful what I say, because like I say, you get censored here on YouTube if you say certain words. As stupid and as pathetic as it is, you can't speak your mind. And I've got to be more professional, because when I come on and talk about these wrongings in a certain way, it comes across as violence, and like I say, it gets censored and the video gets taken down. So in 2016, he was convicted of 71 offences against 23 little ones. The youngest was just 6 months old. The judge at the trial noted that the number of his victims was likely to be nearer 200. His known victims are Malaysian, Cambodian, but Jim Gamble, who used to lead child investigations in Britain, told Huckle is likely to have offended in the UK. The National Crime Agency caught and arrested Huckle in 2014 following a tip-off from an Australian colleagues investigating a notorious dark web bacon site. Their painstaking analysis of the material Huckle posted on the dark web helped put him behind bars for at least 25 years. He got 22 life sentences, but he was given a minimum of 25 years. But some of the things he had online, he was on that fucking dark web with a string of other depraved, sick bacons, and he's uploading everything that he was doing with these little ones. He was posing as a good Samaritan, pretending to be a devoted Christian, helping the most vulnerable and deprived little ones in communities. And he exploited his status as a white man to gain their trust, groom, and then do that to their little ones. And he also boasted on the dark web about how easy it was to get away with it. And he actually made a manual for all the other bacons that were watching him and watching the thousands of videos of him doing things to these little ones. 20,000 images and videos that he had uploaded, so all these other bacons and sickos, depraved wrong'uns, could watch what he was doing. And he was boasting about how easy it was to do it. And he was actually, like I've just said, a manual for all these other ones, how to do it and how to get away with it. So how many other depraved bacons have actually taken his advice? Over a decade it was going on for. Luckily, the Australians that investigated managed to hack in and get in to this dark website or whatever this sick, depraved thing was that he had going on the dark web. Luckily, they managed to break in, decode it or whatever they do to get into it, got into his account or whatever it was that he was sharing, and he was arrested and they got him took down before he could return and continue to do what he was doing. But for a decade, he got away with it. And how many Bacons has he met within that decade online and told them what to do and how to get away with it? Hopefully, if there was any more of them wrong'uns, they also got caught as well. He travelled to Cambodia, a notorious magnet for Western Bacons who go there for that fucking sick, depraved thing. He then went on to India, embedded in poor community, posing as a Christian, just as he did in Malaysia and Cambodia. He made several references in his diary to one particular 10-year-old from a city slum, took photos of her and everything else. I'm not going to say exactly because it's too disturbing, like I say, for YouTube. And he made several return trips to the UK, including a significant amount of time of 2 churches in Britain. In one of those churches, he became a Sunday school teacher, just as he did in Malaysia. But in Malaysia, it's taboo to talk about anything that's happened with little ones. So a little one, obviously reporters afterwards have went to where Huckle was looking for these victims and obviously looking for the places where he was working, and a lot of them had come forward. And one obviously was a lot older than what she was when he first met her. When she was 3, he was doing the worst RAPE. He was doing that to this little one for a number of years. She actually, when she got a little bit older, went and told her parents. She got told to shut up, pretend it didn't, just ignored it, because like I say, in Malaysia, it's taboo. They don't like to talk about these things. They would rather pretend it didn't happen. And that's what they done with that poor little victim. She was told to shut up, and she had to put up. And that wrong'un got away with doing that for a number of years. But he got his justice inside a prison, which I'm going to start talking about shortly. But before I do, just going to tell you exactly who Paul Fitzgerald is. Paul Fitzgerald, from an early age, had been into different criminality. And from the age of 13, he'd been in and out of custody. He was a diagnosed psychopath, currently obviously serving a life sentence. He got a minimum of 34 years for murdering Huckle, the worst of the worst. And he was described as someone who derives pleasure from fantasies of torture, rape, and cannibalism. His criminal history began at the age of 13, which includes several violent and sex offences. He has prior convictions for indecent assault, 2004 and 2006, battery and assault, occasioning actual bodily harm. So he was given an IPP sentence in 2009 because of, like I've just said, he was already on an offender treatment, and he was also on an offender, the register, the Bacon register, I'll just say instead of saying that. He was on the Bacon register because he was a Bacon himself. He was doing these crimes against women. He came across an elderly woman who was out walking her dog. He put something against her throat, and luckily she managed to fight him off and get away because he had these sick fantasies in his head what he was going to do. And when the coppers went and raided his house, they found a manual in his diary, he had in, "I love to RAP women." So he is an absolute sick wrong'un himself. But like I've said, when he's done this murder on Richard Huckle, he has thought of himself as a higher in the Bacon hierarchy. He hasn't done anything to kids, so he didn't see himself as bad as Huckle, which obviously he wasn't as bad as Huckle. He had sick fantasies against women, where Huckle had this against little ones. And they came and met each other in cell 43. Two monsters who met in cell 43 before poetic justice prison murder. So 10:30 on the morning of the murder, Richard Huckle was in his pad and Paul Fitzgerald went in the pad with makeshift weapons, makeshift shanks, toothbrush with a screw melted in. And he was known inside of prison because he tried to take a female prison guard hostage because of these sick fantasies that he still had inside of prison. He did manage to take her hostage, but she got away. But he was trying to do this inside of prison as well. And he was in his reports inside of prison, do not have female staff present by themselves in the presence of Paul Fitzgerald because he's an absolute wrong'un. So on the morning in what year was it again? October 2019, he went into his pad and began attacking him. He tied his hands and feet together, started sticking him, smashing him, and banging his head off the wall, knocking him unconscious. When he was waking back up, he was actually inserting a spoon into him and beginning to smash him all over the pad. The attack lasted for 90 minutes while he was saying different things to him, saying, "This is what happens, and this is how your victims felt," as he was doing things to him. SEX offences, 2 bacons on each other inside the pad, 90 minutes, prolonged and sadistic attack. And he did actually say that afterwards he was wanting to eat parts of his body. And the final thing, or that I was going to say the final blow, but he stuck a pen up his nostrils into his brain. That was a catastrophic injury, but then he put an electric cord round his neck whilst doing things to him from behind and choked him to death, ending his life there and then. And it was just before 11:30 when, will I find this somewhere on here, because it actually said that the screws that were going round doing the checks, because normally they're opening people up round about that time for dinner, or they're putting people back behind the doors, but the probably would have been going round to see if everybody was out, and obviously they've seen that the door was shut, and as they've looked in, they've seen Fitzgerald straddling him, still had a hold of him, whilst he was dead, giving him a hug, giving him his last goodbyes, sicko. But it did say, like I say, if the screws hadn't have came past, the guards hadn't have walked past and seen inside the cell, that must have been a disturbing sight looking in and seeing that, because who knows whether or not the pair of them probably had nothing on, covered in blood, straddling him. And he did say, like I've said, he wanted to eat parts of his body. And this was what he was actually saying in court as well. But like I say, he was obviously trying to get off. If he's took this to court, he's already admitted to what he was doing. And he's actually tried to get off on diminished responsibility. But that is one of the worst murders inside of high security prison. But a lot of people probably watching this will say, well, it wasn't the worst. It was one of the best, because that's what that bacon deserved. Two wrongs, two wrong'uns have made a right. The right is that Huckle is no longer, and the other right is that Fitzgerald is took off the streets for an even longer amount of time because he was doing IPP, where he probably, I think it was just 3 or 4 year recommendation where he could have been back out on the streets. Even though he was diagnosed as a psychopath, he could have gotten back out onto the streets and offended even more. But now he's doing life with a minimum of 34 years and he probably will never get out again. But hopefully he might take out some more bacons. Even though he's a bacon himself, he might come across other inmates who are just like Richard Huckle, and he'll take out poetic justice, prison justice at its finest. And yes, it was sick what he done to him as he was killing him, but he said he wanted him to know what it felt like for what he was doing to his victims. But let us know, people, what you think about this in the comments. Prison justice is a must inside of prison. Yes, maybe this one went a little bit too far, because normally when we talk about prison justice, like Ian Huntley when he got his, he's been smashed to pieces with a metal bar and cabbaged and then died. Now that is a good bit of prison justice. This is debatable because obviously he's doing despicable things to him whilst he's killing him, and it's bacon. So if you agree or revel in the fact that he's getting sodomized whilst he's killing him, then it's a bit of a debatable one. So let us know in the comment section, people. But I'm going to leave that one there for now. I'm just thought I would bring this to your attention because, like I say, it is one of the most gruesome. There is another one which I'm going to do as well, where an inmate was disemboweled, but I'll leave that one for another time, people. So let me know your thoughts in the comment section and whether or not you're liking these type of videos. And if you are, you know the drill, people. Remember to comment, like and subscribe. Take care, people. But most importantly, stay safe.